This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the simplest and best website builder. It is the main objective of this channel to debunk some common misconceptions about the late Roman Empire, because the late Romans are very often treated quite unfairly by many historians. They are often portrayed as weak, decadent, and degenerate. In many videos I hopefully managed to show that this portrayal is wrong. And one of those famously wrong portrayals has to do with the so-called fall of Rome itself. No other topic of the late Roman Empire creates so much confusion as it is taught so wrongly starting already in school. In this video, I want to explore what the Romans themselves of those days were actually thinking about the events that took place in 476 AD, the year that is so often cited as the date for the supposed fall of Rome. I hope I will be able to show that the Romans themselves did not see this event as a fall. Nay, on the contrary, they saw it in a surprisingly positive way. What is commonly called the fall of the Roman Empire was in reality, first of all, only concerning the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire fell around 1,000 years later, so therefore the terminology fall of the Roman Empire for that event in 476 AD makes no sense. More correctly, it should be called end of the line of Western Roman emperors or end of the Western Roman state. And in a future video, where I will talk about who actually the last Western Roman emperor was, we shall see that even that terminology is really not entirely correct, since Romulus Augustus himself was only a usurper to the Western Roman throne, or more correctly his father, the Magister Militum Flavius Orestes. In reality, Julius Nepos was the rightful Western Roman emperor. But if the abdication of a Western Roman usurper managed to get into the history books as this grand fall of the Western Roman Empire, then who is to say that Romulus Augustus really was the last Western Roman emperor? We could as well say that this title belongs to Julius Nepos, or to Flavius Belisarius, who in 540 AD was Western Roman emperor for a short while, even if only to trick the Ostrogoths into giving up Ravenna. Or we could also say that the usurpers in Italy of the 600s and 700s, which then was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, were actually the last Western Roman emperors. Olympius in 650 AD, Mitzios and his son in 668 and 669, Georgius in 710, Basil Onomagolos in 717, and lastly Tiberius Petasius in 730 or 731. We can see that even saying who really was the last Western Roman emperor is not so easy. So thus giving a decisive date for the end of the Western Roman Empire is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Even before Romulus Augustus was famously deposed in early September of the year 476 AD, even before that, the Western Roman Empire was for quite a few times without an emperor, once even for up to 2 years. For instance, from 423 to 425, after the death of Honorius, so before the ascension of Valentinian III to the Western throne. During those 2 years, Theodosius II was the sole ruler of the Roman Empire, and he ruled from Constantinople. So did the Western Empire then fall in 423 and was it resurrected in 425 just because there was no Western Roman Emperor for that time? So we can see that calling 476 AD the end of the Western Roman Empire is very problematic. Because when something similar happened in 476 AD, just some 50 years after the last time that the Western throne was vacant for a long time, who was to say that this time things would be so different? Is it then so strange to imagine that the Romans themselves had absolutely not seen this event as a fall? So let's imagine now that you would have a time machine and you would be able to travel back in time and to talk to the Romans of those days themselves. How would they have seen Odoacer taking over the rule in Italy? What would they have thought about this event? First of all, we must note that the city of Rome itself was in 476 AD in better shape than just a few years before. The city had been sacked in 472 AD by Ricimer's barbarian troops and was quite likely damaged in parts. For instance, we have one inscription from near the Curia Julia, the Senate house in the Forum Romanum, dating from around 472 or 473 AD, stating that the atrium of Minerva had been repaired. This was a portico at the Senate house, where a gilded statue of Minerva was located, which was apparently destroyed during the intense fighting between Ricimer's and Anthemius' troops in 472. The orders for these repairs, and we can assume that many more such repairs were carried out throughout the city in the aftermath of 472, were given most likely by the short-lived Western Emperor Olybrius, who reigned himself from Rome, and carried out by the urban prefect Acilius Aginantius Faustus. We can here see impressively the love of the Romans for their ancient monuments and the care with which they tried to preserve the ancient splendor of their city. It is even more fascinating since Minerva was a pagan deity and most people by that time were already Christians. So seeing Christians repairing Greco-Roman statues also shows that certainly not everybody tried to destroy the Greco-Roman statues. In fact, I would say that the vast majority revered the old monuments. So we might think that after Odoacer had deposed Romulus Augustus, such repairs would suddenly stop, right? After all, we are taught that the barbarians had now taken over the government and ended Roman rule, but this is very far from the truth. In fact, the later Western consul Decius Marius Venantius Basilius, on orders of Odoacer himself, had some damages repaired at the Colosseum in 484 AD. An inscription has been found in which these repairs are documented. Apparently the Amphitheatrum Flavium had been damaged in an earthquake. This is absolutely remarkable. Roman buildings being repaired after the so-called fall of Rome in 476. So we can see that nothing actually happened in Rome in 476 and the city was paradoxically probably in a much better shape in 480 AD, so when according to history books the Western Roman Empire had officially fallen, than it was after the fighting of 472 AD, when officially the Western Roman Empire still existed. But what then did the Romans think of that event in 476 AD? How did they perceive it? Well, if they would have possessed computers and the internet, I'm sure that they would have wanted to build their own websites and share with the world how they would have perceived the events of 476 AD. But the poor chaps did have neither computers nor the internet. But luckily, you do. And even better, you can use the easiest, most intuitive and best website builder in order to share your ideas with the world, namely Squarespace. Squarespace is hands down the easiest to use website builder that I have ever seen in my life. There is no need to know coding, then search engine optimization is already integrated, and you have the most powerful analytics tools at your disposal. With just a few clicks and by dragging and dropping, you can create the most impressive websites, and they are already super optimized from the get-go. No matter if you want to create a history blog, of course about Roman history, or an online shop for selling Roman merch, seriously, there is no better way than with Squarespace because you have all the necessary blogging tools integrated. So don't hesitate and go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Maiorianus to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And by doing that, you don't only create a super awesome website of your own, but you also support this channel and help to end misconceptions about the late Roman Empire. Thank you, friend of late Roman history. So back to what the Romans themselves of that time thought about the regime change in Ravenna, from the usurper Flavius Orestes and his son Romulus Augustus to the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. Well, a fragment by the Eastern Roman historian Malchus might shed some light on that matter, in which he wrote, "The Senate had chosen Odoacer, a man of military and political experience, to safeguard their own affairs and had determined that Zeno should confer upon him the rank of patrician and entrust him with the government of Italy." We can thus see how closely the Senate of Rome worked together with Odoacer. And indeed, under Odoacer, the senatorial aristocracy of Rome experienced increased power, much more so than under the earlier Roman emperors. In fact, we can observe that the power of the Senate of Rome increased greatly in the time of the last Western Roman emperors. The Emperor Olybrius himself, for instance, was a Roman senator of the illustrious house of the Antiquity from Rome. The senators, counterintuitively, had much more power than they had, for instance, some 100 years earlier. Thus, for a senator in 476 AD, the answer would have been clear. The Roman Empire was being reborn, since the Senate now enjoyed much more power than in the times of the Tetrarchy or in the times of Constantine or Theodosius. Now suddenly it was the Senate who worked closely together with the new ruler. Now suddenly the Senate sent envoys to the emperor in Constantinople. And it was also the Senate who chose to ignore Julius Nepos and who before had chosen not to support Romulus Augustus. So for the senators, the time under Odoacer was a new beginning of increased political power, very counterintuitive to what you would be taught in school. No sign of a fall, of decay or dissolution, but a new beginning of political power for this ancient order that dated back to the early days of the Republic. How fitting that 1,000 years after the Senate had started the Roman Republic, the Senate now again would have increased power of government. Odoacer wanted political continuity and left Rome to the Romans. All state offices, all institutions were left undisturbed to the Romans. Thus, in fact, paradoxically, life under this so-called barbarian was probably better than under the constant civil wars of the previous emperors. But even for a common Roman living in Rome, a fall of Rome made absolutely no sense. From the perspective of a Roman living in Italy in 476 AD, the government change in Ravenna only meant that instead of a Western emperor, who was himself an unrightful usurper, a Germanic patricius would now reign as an official representative of the Roman emperor in Constantinople. Instead of a fall, this would have been seen as a reunification of the Roman Empire. Instead of two emperors, one in the east and one in the west, there now again would be only one emperor in Constantinople, such as had been the case over 100 years earlier, in the times of Constantine, of Constantius II, or of Julian. All these Roman emperors had reigned from Constantinople, and so for a Roman living in 476 AD, Italy would have been reunified with the Eastern Roman Empire, thus becoming one Roman Empire again, not Eastern and Western Empire anymore, but one Roman Empire with the imperial seat in Constantinople, and with Odoacer being the official representative of the emperor in Italy, reigning in his stead, even issuing coins in the name of Julius Nepos, and leaving the governmental details to the Senate of Rome and the Praetorian prefects and consuls that were still being elected. Virtually nothing had changed in Italy, and so it is a great irony that schools still teach about the fall of 476 AD. In fact, Italy entered a much more prosperous and peaceful time in the following 60 years than it had enjoyed in the previous 60, where Italy and Rome had been ravaged multiple times by Germanic invaders. In fact, the city of Rome might have looked better maintained in the year 500 AD than in 472 AD directly after Ricimer's sack, as paradoxically as this might sound. For 60 years would Italy and Rome enjoy peace, and after Odoacer, Theodoric would continue the same policy of restoration and continuation. So you would have been surprised to hear the common Romans actually seeing the years after 476 as a new beginning for a reunified Roman Empire, and much better times than before. But then how can it be that we still hear so often that Rome fell in 476 AD? Where did this come from? Well, this notion was invented by the Eastern Romans in the 530s AD in order to justify attacking the Austro-Gothic kingdom, in order to delegitimize the Gothic rulers of Italy as barbarians, and in order to portray the Romans in Italy as being under a barbarian tyranny. It was Marcellinus Comes who in the 530s invented this fall of Rome in 476 AD in order to justify the war that was to come. And the war did come, as we know, and it did leave Italy in utter desolation. It was this war that in a sense ended Rome, and if we want to use the term fall of Rome, then the years from 536 to 554 deserve that term a lot more than the events of 476. Because when that war was over, Italy was depopulated, the city of Rome utterly lifeless and deserted, the monuments and buildings not maintained or restored anymore, and all the old Roman institutions and state offices gone. So what we call the fall of 476 AD, the Romans would have seen as a renewal, a reunification of the Roman Empire, a rebirth and a new beginning. And what is sometimes taught in history books as a reunification of the Roman Empire under Justinian was in reality the utter destruction of Italy and the city of Rome. Such, dear friends of the late Roman Empire, is sometimes the irony of history. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And I would especially like to thank our two new Sol Invictus members, Lisa Hutchins and Andrew Thompson. Thank you so much, Lisa Hutchins and Andrew Thompson, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. I really appreciate it a lot. This channel would not work without our amazing Patreons and YouTube members, and I want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibiago, amici. And if you want to learn more about how the city of Rome transformed from its peak until the Middle Ages, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in learning how Rome would have looked shortly after the supposed fall of 476, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.